I'm an adopted person, and I never had the chance to meet my mom. My mother, when I finally did a little research and found out who she was, she had moved on, and I didn't get the chance to meet her. Now, what's kind of interesting is on the day that the information came about my birth mother, the way it works in this province is you just send in a letter to the government, and you say, hey, I might be interested in finding something out. And then they ignore you for some period of time, which in my case was about 18 months. And one day, let me take the story back one notch. I used to own a record store, and on Fridays, this guy used to come into the record store named Norm Solomon. And Norm used to always sell me the best records. Norm was an older guy, and he had clearly thousands of records in his heyday. And I always looked forward to Fridays because he'd always bring in cool records. On this one occasion, he brought in an envelope, and in the envelope were some photographs. And I wasn't really interested in photographs. I wanted his records. And he hands me this envelope, and he says, you're going to want these. And I open the envelope, and it turns out that in the 60s, Norm was an aspiring photographer, and he managed to get himself a press pass, a media pass, and these pictures he handed me, which he was asking me the princely sum of $50 for, were never before seen pictures of the Beatles at Maple Leaf Gardens in August of 1966. He hands me these pictures, and I sort of unraveled a little tiny bit, because for me, the Beatles are sort of like the deities of music, you know, and unseen Beatle pictures would be like somebody reaching into a Loblaws bag and pulling out the Holy Grail and saying, can you give me $5 for this? So I walked out of the record store that night a little bit dizzy with this handful of never before seen pictures of the Fab Four on their fourth last concert of all time, August 16th, 1966. And I go home, and I'm waiting for my wife to come home from taking my tiny kids to ballet with my heart beating at about 160 beats a minute. I can't believe what I'm holding under my left hand at the dining room table. While I'm waiting and passing time, I'm going through the almost methodical process of opening the mail, which is just something that you do the same way as you take a shower. You can't really explain how you take a shower, but you do it the same way every day. And there I am opening up the mail, and in this one envelope that looks suspiciously like a water bill, I pull out my long-form birth certificate. And it turns out I'm a whole other person, and that's a different story. But I want to fast forward because there's a connection here. There's a connection here because 6 months or a year or two later, I can't remember exactly, I've tracked down my mother's high school best friend. It's the only link I have to my biological mother, who has died. And I go out and I see her. She's living in Vancouver, and we start chatting. And I'm telling her this story about the Beatles pictures because to me this is a significant, it's a significant coincidence that these amazing photographs landed on my desk the same day that I got my long-form birth certificate. And as I'm telling her this story, and I'm including many more details that I'm not sharing with you in order to truncate this text, she stops me in the middle and she says, oh, I went to that concert with your mom. True story. True story. And then she goes into the back and she says, oh, I got something for you. And I'm thinking that she's going to bring out Luke Saber's lightsaber and say, this was your father's. But she brought out something even better. She brought out the copy of Twist and Shout that she and my mother had listened to as kids, as 15-year-olds smoking cigarettes, which I can still smell. And right here in the corner is my mother's name written in pencil. And on the back is her phone number. And she hands me this record and she says, your mom and I, when we were 15-year-old kids, we used to sit around and listen to the Beatles all the time. And it was one of those moments that really took me back. Now, I didn't have a record player with me in Vancouver, but when I went home and I put the record on, which I'm going to do right now, this is Twist and Shout, the Beatles, and is an incredibly well-loved copy of this record, which features a, what do you call those things? Those that you press the button and it prints a letter on the tape. There's my mother's name, Petra Zimmerman. Anyway, when I got home and I put this record on, true story, it was like I was listening to this record with my mom. I could only think about how she is a 15-year-old girl, and she was 17 when she got pregnant with me, that she is a 15-year-old girl, how she listened to this record, and I could hear it through her ears, and it's the closest I'll ever get to meeting her, and I think it's a pretty great story about a record that you'd never get with an MP3.